To celebrate Veterans Day, I'd like you to know about 5 brothers who all served in World War II. They've all passed on, but they all made it home from the war, some wounded, one also surviving one of the worst atrocities of the war. That was Alex Strozier. And his sons and a grandson, who all followed into the military, reflect on the spirit of the fighting Stroziers from Chatham, Louisiana.
This is a picture of my dad in the Bataan Death March.
Chuck Strozier's dad, Alex, managed to grin for this Japanese propaganda photo, wearing a bandage from a blow to the head by one of his captors. Alex Strozier was one of 80,000 starving American and Filipino prisoners of war, forced to march up to 75 miles to their prison camp. Thousands of them would not survive, mostly Filipinos. Back to that famous photo.
I've even seen it back when I was in high school, reading, the history books.
But Chuck and his brothers never realized that was their dad until decades later. The grin should have been a giveaway.
I think that's one of the reasons the Japanese hated him so much, because he'd smile at them.
Chuck says if the Japanese knew, they also would have hated his dad even more for something else he did. At his prison camps, he hid his rations of rice for prisoners who were in worse shape.
He made sure that they were fed, at least to carry them through for the days that they were there.
And wasn't he starving?
He was starving too. They called him the mule because he just seemed to get up and go right on. It's not that he didn't suffer, he did suffer, but he cared a lot about his comrades.
Alex Strozier would earn the Distinguished Service Medal, Silver and Bronze Stars, and 2 Purple Hearts. And of course, the POW medal. Chuck says his father endured daily torture, from one guard especially in Japan. But after the U.S. dropped the atomic bombs and Japan surrendered, Alex Strozier got deadly payback with that guard who hung around the liberated camp for too long.
Dad called him and drug him over to an outdoor latrine that the men used to defecate in, and he drowned him.
The Strozier brothers say their dad was part of an Army Air Corps unit that was pressed into infantry duty with few weapons and ammo. Another son, Jim, remembers his dad telling the story of his capture.
He said, "Well, son, we were sleeping, and about daybreak I felt something poking me in the side." And he said, opened my eyes, and he says, "There's a little Japanese soldier standing there." He said his rifle was longer than he was tall. But he had a gun, and I didn't.
But Jim says his father and his brothers didn't talk much about the war. Hardy, a tank driver who arrived in France on D-Day +3 and fought on through the Battle of the Bulge, earned a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. Another uncle, James, earned those same medals in the first U.S. offensive against Japan at Guadalcanal. Another uncle, Mike, earned a Purple Heart in the Pacific. Less is known about the last of the fighting Stroziers, C.E., who's thought to have suffered greatly with what we now know is PTSD.
They saw and experienced some horrific things. They had friends die in combat. Two tours.
Alex's son, Teddy, was in Air Force Security Forces, including in Vietnam.
I'd get down, and then I got to thinking my dad, what he went through. But then I'd get, I shouldn't feel this way because my dad went through a lot more than what I did.
Teddy's son, David, also went into the Air Force.
I saw the flash and then heard the blast.
And he survived the terrorist bombing of the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia in 1996 as the U.S. enforced no-fly zones over Iraq.
I know it's a lot to other people, but what I went through, I don't think it compares to what my grandfather and his brothers went through during that time of our nation.
When I see this picture right here with Dad, in circumstances that he could lose his life, and knowing that he didn't know if he was going to live from one day to the next, and was still able to carry a grin on his face, tells me that those people at that time, that generation, have the fortitude to carry themselves from day to day and make it, and still with a smile on their face. It's something we could learn from them.
One of David Strozier's sons is in the Air Force, so that's 4 generations of Stroziers serving our country. Thanks to all of them, and thank you to all of you veterans for our freedom. I'm Jerry May. If you know a hometown patriot, I'd sure like to meet them, so I hope you'll tell me about them.